Good morning, everybody. So we're going to get started. Actually, mostly for the benefit of the people online. So we have about the same number of people that are joining us online, and so we wanted to make sure and get started for their sake. We want to get started with our presentation. So please feel free to keep eating, but we're going to get started with our presentations for this morning. Let me just begin by saying, thank you for all of you for coming. I will admit this is a lot of work to put this on, but it ends up being one of my favorite events, and really because I get to see all of you. And so as I do almost every year, I just, one of the things I really encourage all of you to do is just meet everyone at the table. I think you'll find just some amazing people in this room. And so, yeah, I just really appreciate you coming and love being here. So let me also take a moment to introduce the Cedarstone team. So first, let me introduce Carol Meitler. So Carol Meitler is a CPA and has been with Cedarstone for more than 4 years now. She'll actually be one of our speakers today. You'll get to hear from Carol a little bit later. And then Walter Spintes. So Walter, you all probably have talked to on the phone. Walter handles our operations and trading. And Walter, actually, I wanted to recognize, Walter just finished his MBA at Cal Baptist. So, just last week. So congratulations. Congratulations. All right. Well, we have I think a great slate of presentations for you this morning. We're going to start out with a presentation from Jared Teach, and Jared is with us from Strive Asset Management. So several of you, many of you have probably seen the ticker STRV. It's an S&P 500 index fund, and Strive has a very unique value proposition in the industry, and I'm excited for you all to hear from Jared about what Strive is doing. There is also another investment that you'll probably see in your portfolios is a ticker by the name of SCHOC. We call it SHOC. I don't know if that's what you guys call it, but it's a semiconductor fund. That's also a Strive fund. And so Jared will be sharing with us a little bit about that fund as well. So after Jared, we'll talk a little bit about taxes with Carol, and then I'll wrap up with a little bit of market commentary and outlook. So, with that, I'm going to invite Jared up to begin his presentation.
What's his last name again?
Teach.
I'm not sitting to learn anything.
And Dan, maybe that's a great segue. So within the folders on your tables, you should have an agenda, and also a package where you can take notes for each session.
There we go.
Let me just get you all set up here, Jared.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you very much for having me. Steve, you want your copy?
Yes.
I know how that goes. Again, my name is Jared Teach. I'm with Strive Asset Management. If you haven't heard of Strive, don't worry. We're the new kids on the block. You might have known about our co-founders. So I thought we might start there and just talk a little about why we exist. Unfortunately, the reason we do exist, because 10 years ago, you'd be laughing when I tell you this story, like, why, what are you doing here? But the world's changed. So why don't we start there? Who here is aware that Don Lemon was let go from CNN recently? Okay. So one of our co-founders is Vivek Ramaswamy, who is running for president of the United States. And he was a gentleman on TV with Don Lemon that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. We can talk about Vivek, and we will mention the reason why he helped co-found this. The other co-founder is Anson Frary. He's not as well known. However, he stepped down from being president of sales and distribution for Anheuser-Busch United States. And so obviously he just had a Wall Street Journal op-ed on some particular opinions he has regarding what's taking place at AB. We are also backed by, has anyone of you heard of Peter Thiel? Okay, he's the co-founder of PayPal. He's a very big deal within Silicon Valley, a tech entrepreneur, also part of Trump's cabinet in the last administration. How about Bill Ackman? Okay, very prominent hedge fund investor. He is very left of center. I tell you this because I start with a lot of political stuff, but this is well beyond that. But unfortunately, we have to talk about how that's affecting our world right now. And so let's get into it. How about ESG? I think that's becoming a pretty popular term these days. Oh, yes. Oh. You have, okay, yes, sorry, I got you now. It's just a quick refresher, ESG, environmental, social, and governance. It's the idea and the Trojan horse for what we call stakeholder capitalism. And so here in the United States in the early 1900s, we started in a belief of shareholder capitalism. Why corporations were founded were to return money to shareholders. There's a new dynamic taking place globally, which is stakeholder capitalism. And that's the idea that you see in Europe quite often, or if you've heard of a Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum, things of this nature. When you look past the last 40 years or so, they've really been prominent in their investing. Stakeholder capitalism is the idea that a corporation, a company, has an obligation to not only return to shareholders, but to additionally turn and focus on those that not necessarily own any other company, but what's best for the world. And that gets pretty dicey pretty quick, because what's best for the United States citizen might be a lot different than what's best for someone in Dubai or someone in Europe. And so that's is where we start to have a different parameter set. What is interesting right now, and the biggest conundrum that we're all facing, is the rise of ESG and what that really means. And so proxy voting, we get those papers about once a year that you all throw in the trash. This has been the catalyst for a lot of these activist groups to come in and use their influence to do some pretty crazy things to shareholders or companies, I should say, that is hurting shareholder returns. So we found a huge fiduciary gap in the industry in which we believe that the largest asset managers on earth are taking your money, using your dollars, going in these boardrooms and voting on social and political agendas that you might not agree with. That should not be a political statement. That is a shareholder capitalism statement. You should not always agree with anyone 100% of the time. And so it's okay if you know where your dollar is going, but you need to know where it's going. And so what we find here is a steady increase in ESG proposals over the years. So activist groups have learned that you don't need much money to push forward stakeholder proposals. And so while proxy voting happens once a year, so that's where the asset managers go in and push the corporate boardrooms around and do all that stuff and say, hey, we want you to do this. Actually, the shareholder proposal and the activist groups work the other 364 days a year. And that's where it gets pretty important. And I don't know if you can see this slide or what it looks like, but you can see the huge increase on the right chart with the black and the pink. And that is BlackRock and Vanguard and how much they've really increased their exposure to ESG investing. What is important about these particular three asset managers are the largest on earth. So these three combined run about 21 trillion in capital. They're starting to knock on the same size as the US GDP by themselves. So they can walk into any boardroom in the SP 500 and they're the largest shareholders of about 85% of those companies. And now, because of what they've done and they have that much push, now you're looking at about 83% of all executive or board member pay on the SP 500 tied to some sort of ESG metric. The problem isn't that someone wants a worse environment. I think we'd all agree we all want better environments for our children. It's not a problem of what you're going to do from a social standpoint. It's how we get there. And we all have differences on that. Again, so while you're going in there, nobody should be bullied in a boardroom. The goal is to do what's best by the shareholder. All right, next slide. Here's the ESG timeline of how this really started to form and take place. So I want you to look at 2008. That's the big one. So 2008 was Occupy Wall Street. Remember that one? Because in 06, 07, 08 is a pretty rough time in the United States. Well, Wall Street had a problem because their reputation was in ruins. And they frankly deserve it. The banks were bailed out with very little ramifications. And so Occupy Wall Street came on, and they're trying to hold one accountable. Wall Street needed a way to fix their reputation. So they're actually turned the table on Occupy Wall Street and used them. And so they put together almost a little, here's what we're doing for you to make you happy. Here's a little something for you. And then it started to catch wind. And what the Wall Street and asset managers and makers could find is, wow, we can charge people 2-3 times the money and not do anything different. And so they started charging a premium on ESG type products. Fast forward to 2014, and here's where it gets really interesting. The state of California and the state of New York started pushing something called CA 100, the Climate Act 100. And so they asked the largest 3 asset managers, again, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, if you want to be on our pension plans, we need you to cut your carbon emissions, excuse me. And so again, they started to get more money from this. That becomes a problem. We'll get the reason why. So Larry Fink, who is the CEO of BlackRock, started putting out these letters on ESG in 2018 that became so popular throughout the industry that he could move markets by these letters. And so he kept on talking about stakeholder capitalism over shareholder capitalism, which is not what the United States is based on. Fast forward to stakeholder capitalism. It's right up there by my ugly mug. And what you see is Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum and Larry Fink, as well as Brian Moynihan from Bank of America, et cetera, 181 CEOs signed off on saying, yeah, we believe that corporations have a duty more so to the world than their shareholders. And then everything moves forward. So it's not a surprise if you remember last year, state of Texas started fighting back on BlackRock, saying, we're actually pulling you from the pension plan. And BlackRock said, what are you talking about? Why would you do that? Well, because you're part of California and New York with the CA 100, and our largest tax revenue is oil. And you're trying to push that out. Why would we invest in you? Which then BlackRock fought back, is like, well, we're the biggest investors in energy. We love energy oil. Which then the comptroller in New York came in and said, whoa, which one are you? You can't be everything to everyone here. And so BlackRock found themselves in a little pickle. One thing you need to know about Strive is we're actually working about 24 different states. We've been the silent hands working with attorney generals and treasurers to fight back on this. And so when you look at how that works, there's a reason why. These attorney generals and treasurers from the state pension plan level are incredibly scary because of this. 10 years ago, when they bought products from a lot of different asset managers, everything was great. Apolitical, neutrality was taking place. But over time, what found is asset managers were starting to push their values on you versus adding value from a shareholder standpoint. And that's a big issue because what that means is all of a sudden these states were opened up to liability from legality issue standpoint. Sorry. So they're afraid that a state employee would sue their state pension plan for not giving the best shareholder return. Fiduciary law, it's a law from the 30s. Sole interest law is a law from the 30s. They're supposed to push that. So here, what you'll find is a chart from 2016 and a chart from 2022. I want you to focus on the top. 2016. So there's always values promoting ESG managers. Always has been. There's some really good ones. You certainly don't want to degrade the ones that are in it for the right reasons. And so the Trillium, the Calverts, et cetera, they've been around for a long time and they're really good at what they do. In the middle, 10 years ago, again, BlackRock, which is iShares, Vanguard, State Street, and that's just a sampling. I mean, so many groups are on board with this. It's pretty crazy. But they too were apolitical and neutral. Now you fast forward to today, And no matter where you want to be, there's a values pushing manager for you. Whether it's the MAGA ETF or God Bless America ETF, where what they push is conservative ideals, obviously Trump type ideas. On the left, now you have all these folks that have moved here. We just want to get back to apolitical. We want to move to that box where Capital Group them back to where we're at in the middle of the strat. That's the goal. And we'll skip this. This is interesting. So I always get asked, like, okay, so give us some examples of what does all this mean when you circle this around? And so a perfect one would be on the right. You can't, again, I'm here. Let me see if I can. There we go. So on the right, this is a vote on Exxon. There's an activist group called Engine Number One. And in 2021, they went to Exxon and said, hey, Exxon, why don't we drill less in the name of climate activism? Exxon responded with, thank you, we appreciate that. We're an oil company, we drill, and we're one of the best in the world at it, no matter what the media tries to push on it. Engine Number One, who at the time owned 0.02% Exxon, said, no, you're gonna do it. But coming out of COVID, Exxon actually wanted to increase drilling by 25%. More oil is gonna be used, more, obviously, everyone go back to work, et cetera. They got the asset managers, quite a few of them, a few dozen, to tell Exxon, no, we actually agree with Engine Number One. You need to cut your drilling by 25%. So if I were to come up here and ask you, if I'm Steve, and I'm having a client meeting with you, and I say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Client, we want to buy this energy fund or this energy ETF. And here's what's going to happen. It's going to be great. They're going to have Exxon in it. They're going to have Chevron. We're going to tell them to drill less. We're going to put more taxes on them. You would never buy that product ever. But what happened was Exxon was forced to drill 25% less because the asset managers went in, replaced 3 of their board members with climate activists, not with energy economists or energy experts, but with climate activists, and forced them to do so. Here's the fallout, and here's the rub on that. Exxon had to go then and talk to their, obviously, shareholders and say, hey, we're drilling 25% less. Just because a company is drilling 25% less in the oil sector doesn't mean they shut down those operations. They sell them. And so not only Exxon, but it's also Chevron and Valero, they're forced to sell a lot of their drilling operations to Russia, Venezuela, and China, PetroChina in particular. BlackRock, the largest shareholder of Exxon, was telling them to drill less, but their second largest shareholder behind the CCP of PetroChina, and they're telling them to drill more. That is what we call a fiduciary law breach. And so those are the things we're trying to fight against. And you can see how folks, different folks voted on this. Another report, here's another one you hear quite often, Apple. There's an activist group called Color of Change. Color of Change has a great mission. It's to eradicate white supremacy. I hope we'd all agree that that's the right thing to do. Here's the rub, it's kind of a front. And so Apple, when Color of Change came to Apple, they said, hey, we would like for you to do a racial equity audit. And Apple's like, listen, this is not best for the shareholders. These are very expensive. And so please, we don't want to do this. And the activist group is like, we don't care, those are 2 breaches right there, fiduciary law, sole interest law again. But the vote did go through, and the fallout from that is going to be this. Apple has to use the lawyers that Color of Change asked for. So between 12 to 24 lawyers, pay them $2,000 a piece per hour for the next 12 to 18 months. And what's going to happen is they're going to spend tens of millions of dollars, et cetera, for Apple to put this report together, give it to Color of Change to take it and do nothing with it to put on a shelf. Until 3 years from now, when Apple missteps some way, or whatever is deemed a misstep, Color of Change will take that and then sue them. And so they're basically paying to get sued down the road. 5 questions. Gosh, I went through it as quickly as possible, but we can talk hours about this stuff because it does get very interesting in a lot of different circumstances. I apologize a little bit all over the place. A couple things I want you to be aware of that we do believe very importantly at Strive regarding investing. So if you're running a country, it is a 2-fuel economy. Obviously it's oil, it's also chips. And so when Steve talks about SHOC, SHOC as the ticker, but SHOC, how you spell it regularly is what we call it. It is because we believe in 2-fuel economy. It is the idea that also is a national security issue. So when China tells you that they want to invade Taiwan in the name of reunification, don't believe them. It's because TSMC, or Taiwanese Semiconductor, it's a company, it's the largest company, semiconductor company on earth, is there. They make 60% of the world's chips and 90% of the world's advanced chips. And so if China were to overtake Taiwan, guess what they get? The chips. Guess what our farmers get? No chips, which means we have no food or military grade chips, et cetera. And so there is actually a huge thing. You saw the Biden administration push through the CHIPS Act this year. That was a good thing. And you're seeing us domestically build factories as quickly as possible. Intel in Ohio, Micron in New York, even TSMC trying to diversify from Taiwan into Scottsdale, et cetera. It's a very important issue. We need to up our manufacturing here domestically. And either way, whether China does invade Taiwan or not, we still think that there's huge ground to be made there. So that is one reason Steve and I talk, he agrees that's a good play for us. So what questions might you have? I just really kind of threw a lot of things at you, but yeah.
You talked about China and the US making these efforts to mitigate the Chinese influence, let's say, on chips.
Yeah.
What about on the area of, you said the other one was oil. What are the factors that are going to be a concern to a Strive?
Yeah.
About the oil, about the oil supply and energy focus.
Yeah,
A
so
big broad section, I realize. Very good question.
you know, it's a great question. So BTUs, British Thermal Unit, they were invented in the early 1700s. It's how much energy it takes to go up 1 degree. Okay. You can do a lot of research on this, but whatever society uses the most BTUs is the most dominant society on earth. And so when we sit here, we talk about the Paris Accord Agreement, the Climate Accord Agreement. It's not a treaty, it's not ratified, there's nothing to it, it's just something you can sign on to. And so there's a huge concern when we sit here and we look at a group like China, who within the Paris Accord Agreement is considered an emerging market, meaning they don't have to basically follow the rules of the developed world. However, the second largest economy on earth, perhaps the first or largest now. There's a lot of problems with that. And so it's something that we sit here and also believe that we are in a secular super cycle, basically, in energy. Goldman Sachs did a little study a few months ago, and what they found is we spent $4.3 trillion in the last 10 years to basically get rid of fossil fuels within the energy arena. We dropped fossil fuel usage from 82% all the way down to 81%. So if you think about what you could do with that from a shareholder return, from a value standpoint, it's pretty impressive. And it should be noted, if you were to use, let's bring this back to stakeholder shareholder capital really quick. If you were to use a Eurostock 600, or basically a broad basket of European equities for the last 40 years, and use that as a proxy for stakeholder capitalism. And if you use the S&P 500 as a proxy for how we do things domestically, what you'll find is S&P 500 from a shareholder capitalism standpoint has outperformed stakeholder capitalism by 2,000%, or annualized about 3.19% annually. And so that's fine if you want to do that. But you deserve every right to get that additional 3.19% and decide what you want to do with your money. So oil, that is a huge issue, and it's another national security issue.
Yeah.
So it's certainly in limbo. It's something we're trying to work behind.
I have a question, as somebody who doesn't really know anything about what you're talking about, but it's very interesting. So you're referring to these CRE laws that were broken around what these people were telling these companies to do. So I'm curious, like, what are those laws? Like, and also when you were talking about Apple with this color of change thing, I didn't quite get like how they got connected, how color of change was now able to tell them what to do.
Yeah, this is so. Yeah, great question, because I didn't do very well
No,
explaining.
it's just I don't know anything about this.
No problem. So an activist group, you only need $25,000 and hold a stock for a year. After year 3, as long as you have $3,000 in that company, you can put forth a shareholder proposal, and you can demand to be voted on, or meet with the CEO, or do whatever the case, and meet with the board and have conversations with them. It's the other 364 days a year to where that activist group will sit there and work with these large asset managers to sit there and say, hey, get on our team on this. We need your help. You have all the votes. Because the proxy voting is the old school, how many shares you have or how many votes you get. And so the other 364 days is where you almost act as a lobbyist, if you will, to try to push people to agree with your proposal. 10 years ago, these activist groups were here, but they're so out of whack that the large asset managers would never support them. But now the stakeholder capitalism, because if I were to go back to the slide, this one, net zero asset manager initiative, over 300 asset managers now signed off to go net zero. And so now these activist groups are being taken basically a lot more serious. And so now they get that vote. And so the Apple thing was actually going to fail. It's at 45%. I keep on hating to use the same firm. They're the poster child, but they're actually not the worst. BlackRock is at 45%, but they own 6% of Apple, so it put over 51%. So now they have.
So if I could just interject. So the way that the way that corporate governance works then is that the shareholders vote on and can pass resolutions. And then once those resolutions are passed, it binds the corporation to fulfill the resolution. So if they then
Like
pass a
25%
resolution to go to net zero or to, execute some type of
Legal, whatever. Yeah.
diversity goals, then that becomes a requirement on management. And so I think that's what Jared is saying. Is
Thank you,
that
Steve.
then, so then that becomes this requirement. And so that's why Jared was saying, well, then that is a reason to sue Apple down the road. They forced this resolution to be passed. That now becomes governing law rules within the corporation. And now then those organizations will look for reasons to force the corporations if they don't achieve net zero or if they don't achieve those goals, it becomes a reason to sue the corporation.
So what laws do they break when they make these demands?
Yeah, so shareholder capital is really born in the early 1900s, but in the 1930s and the early 1940s, there were a lot of rules enacted to make sure that it really levels the playing field. And one of the largest was fiduciary law and sole interest law, meaning, hey, listen, at the end of the day, we're in this for the shareholder. We have to do what's best for you, not what's best to line our own pockets. And so that's been the basis for the United States. And that's why you saw a really strong outperformance. And we can talk about history of World War II, et cetera. But beyond that, this is where the outperformance in shareholder capital started taking place domestically and why we started doing better than any other economy from a market perspective. So it's been around forever. Yeah, and you should feel good about that existing. Because if not, it'd really be the wild, wild west.
Yeah. So are there ramifications for these companies for breaking those laws? Like,
Yes.
how is that enforced?
So either they can be voted out, additional board members until they follow, or they can start being sued, et cetera. So a lot of legal basis on that. If they don't follow, the new laws have been enacted by the boards and things of that nature. Yeah, there's a lot. This is where it gets even more hairy to Steve's point, as far as now, if you don't drop your drilling by 25%, now you can be sued because you're not following that part of your life. So. What other questions do we have? Yes.
Can you go into that net zero asset management?
I wish I knew more about it, honestly. So Davos, and this happened again at the World Economic Forum. I don't know entirely too much about it. I know you hear a lot of by 2050 have this or by 2030 have that. Each one, there's a lot of different ones out there. But this one is most concerning to me because I know over 300 asset managers signed up for it.
What are they signing? What are they doing?
I'm not even sure what they're doing.
Oh,
That's the thing.
but
Because, well, no, it's the reason it's affecting us though. For instance, we just did a research article on what's really taking place from a climate standpoint. And the Paris Accord Agreement is a perfect example of this. So they want to reduce global warming. Okay, that's great. Climate change is obviously taking place. But the fact is, it's really taking place between 1.5 to 3 degrees Celsius over the next 100 years. And when you talk to all these groups, they're saying we're from 3 to 8 degrees Celsius. But the new data is actually saying 1.5 to 3 degrees. That is actually perfect. That is perfect for economic growth, and that is perfect for our standard of life. The reason Paris Accord Agreement decided to settle on 1.5 degrees Celsius in the first place. No kidding, it was a group of islands that negotiated that. There was no scientific backing. And so when you have a lot of different ideas that come out, different initiatives, what is it based on? And so I'm not trying to make light of it. I just don't know because there's so many of them. I can't go into that until I know the facts. So, but yeah, it's crazy. What other questions, Steve?
Well, yeah, I would just interject, maybe I'll just kind of share my perspective. I'll come up here and take the mic. Yeah, and maybe I will. So, I was just gonna, for the sake of the people on the internet.
Oh, yeah.
I'll trade places where, so please stay here though.
Absolutely.
But yeah, let me just share my perspective and one of the reasons why I asked Jared to speak, and one of the reasons we added this fund into the portfolio. So the promise of some of these ESG funds is that you can do well by doing good, right? And that's kind of the selling point, is you can do well by doing good, and doing good as defined by diversity goals and global warming goals, and these goals outside of merely making money, right? And so this sounds very attractive on the face of it, but the promise or the sales pitch of ESG often misses the mark. And a few examples of that I learned that I think were helpful to kind of peel this back is that there's actually there's the great example would be that Chevron has a better ESG score than Tesla, right? And this is one of the things that Elon Musk has pointed out, is that, wait a minute, here we are, Tesla, we're the ones who are helping the world get off of fossil fuels, and yet we're scored lower than ESG. And so one of the things that kind of peels back is that there really is the research has showed is there's really very, very poor correlation between an ESG score and these companies that implement ESG policies and actually doing the good that they purport to do, right? I mean, that's a major feeling. So you're not doing the good that you're selling. And then secondly, they're not really doing well. So the second thing that kind of peeled this back for me was that the funds that focus on ESG are consistently underperforming funds that just focus on excellence, right? Which is what is attractive to me with Strive, is that my perspective is, my goal is to maximize return for you all, right? To protect your hard-earned money. And so what I'm looking to do is make sure that primary goal is achieved. And so that's the fiduciary responsibility, right? That's what you all have entrusted to us. Now, that doesn't mean we can't do what's right for the company, right? That the company goes out there and just ruthlessly makes money, right? That's the way it's been for 100 years. The company also has to be a good steward, but you would want that as well, right? It's taking the power away from the shareholders and what the shareholders would want, and putting it into the hands of outside groups that are either minor shareholders or groups that have contrary interests to your interests. I hope that helps. Frank, you had a question.
Yeah, so I mean, you made it kind of clear, right? I mean, we are in effect your shareholders.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So you're investing in Strive.
Yes.
And so your premise is Strive in theory is going to give us a better return on our investment versus perhaps other investments that are in the portfolio. So where is Strive at today? And where is Strive going in terms of return goals, right? So how do they compare today to, let's say, the average return that has been happening in portfolio, right? So are they outperforming? Or are they performing at the same level? Are they underperforming right now? Where are you guys at?
So currently they're passive ETFs. And so our goal is to match the index. So whatever the index is doing, we want to do. Okay, so the S&P 500 being the STRV, we need to track the S&P 500. The difference being though is we've got to get bullish in the boardrooms to make sure that other large asset managers are not pushing down that return of the index by pushing their stakeholder capital. And so right now we're doing passive ETFs for the idea of getting as many boardrooms as possible to start inflicting our thought process and getting back to neutral. Now we will be opening up some fixed income ETFs here soon because you can see a huge delta or a huge divergence in the returns in the fixed income side. We're also going to have some mutual funds and some private equity things of that nature. So those are coming. As far as shock, for instance, it's the largest 30 domestic semiconductor names.
Okay, so I'm still not hearing the answer to the question.
They're
So you're building.
correct.
So are you meeting that objective? Okay, so you're performing, or are you outperforming? Or are you just simply meeting the index, which is a moving target?
So the S&P 500, what's interesting is you're outperforming slightly, but it's nothing that I would sit and say, because a little divergence we have there is the S&P 500 is you're told that you have the largest 500 market cap names, right? Well, what they don't tell you, or they don't quite talk about entirely too much, is that there's also a human element and a human investment committee that determines its 500 names. So you could hit every box you wanted. Tesla Square, they weren't in the 500 when they actually were the top largest 500. So we eliminate that human element, put the 500 names in, and right now that's starting to outperform. Again, you have that human bias in there, and you push in stakeholder capitalism, that can hurt a little bit. So the idea being is, even if you like energy, if you like semiconductors, if energy, if I said we're going on a super cycle, well, if that means the index goes up 50%, in reality, it could go up 75% if we got the votes right inside. Now, would everyone, all high tides rise, all boats? Yes, and that's okay. So right now it's index, and there's different types of strategies for that. And Steve can talk to you about that in regards to how your portfolio is working as far as what you're doing for active. But there's always an index portion of your portfolio usually as well.
So, yeah, does that answer your question, Frank?
Kind of maybe.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is we hadn't held Stride for very long, so this is a relatively new position in the portfolio. So, when it comes to, the S&P 500 index, if Strive's shareholder activism adds value, I think, what happens is it improves the performance of Exxon, for sake of example, and then everyone who holds Exxon is the beneficiary of Strive's shareholder activism, right? If that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And so we're not necessarily looking for outperformance, especially out of the STRV relative to the S&P 500 index. But what we are looking for is for the index itself to have superior returns because of Stride's activism. So,
Other questions?
So is Stride an ETF?
Correct. STRV is one you probably look for, the STRV.
But you told me it's ticker symbol, but I'm not getting the answer.
Yeah, so it's STRV, and then the semiconductor fund that we own is SHOC. SHOC. Very good. Sunil?
So the top 10 holdings for STRV is quite similar to other S&P 500 ETFs.
Exactly.
Is it exactly the same, or will it eventually deviate from that?
So here's what's crazy. So we have a correlation rate of 99.98%.
Okay.
So they're the same. However, on a quarterly basis, because we don't have that human element, there could be anywhere from 80 to 84 different names. So we rebalance them quarterly. And those 84 names only make up between 2 to 4% of the portfolio. They're at the bottom of the S&P 500.
Okay.
And so when those get added in, added out, or pushed out, it all starts bringing back. So there'll be days where we might have a little bit of outperformance, and there might be days have a little bit of underperformance. But, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Very good.
Thank you, Jared.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, well, in the interest of time, I think that we'll just jump right into the next presentation, but feel free to get up and get a cup of coffee or get a refill on your breakfast. So the PowerPoint will be right. Excuse me, the PDF will be right there. And of course, when we put it into presentation mode, that's how we escape to get out of the presentation. So yeah. Go to this there. Okay. You'll go to this. Okay. Okay. Very good. Nobody. Nobody. All right, so all right, well, let's shift gears here a little bit and talk about some taxes. And so I'm actually really excited about what we're going to share with you here over the next 20-30 minutes about some of the additional work that we're doing on the tax front. And so first, let me just introduce Carol Meitler. So many of you have probably already met Carol, hopefully so. Carol is a longtime dear friend of mine, has been with Cedarstone for about 4 years. Her background is as a CPA. She was with both the audit and tax department at Deloitte. And it's been great to have Carol on board because we've been able to really advance and improve the level of tax advice that we're able to provide to you all. And so we wanted to share some of the things that we've been doing and some of the things that we're even planning on doing. And really, I wanted to maybe do an introduction before I bring Carol, give it off to Carol, by just sharing that, you know, so many people really consider financial planning. Some people just think of it as just investment management. Hey, just manage my money. Some people think of it as, hey, just am I going to be okay in retirement? But really, there's this third element, which is tax planning. And I think it's often overlooked. But there are actually some really exciting things that we can do to really combine the financial planning that we normally do with some additional tax planning. And so maybe, you know, maybe I'll start out by saying, well, what's the difference between tax planning and what kind of advice that you get from your CPA, right? And here's how I would characterize it, right? So tax planning really is about paying taxes at the lowest overall rate for your lifetime, right? For your lifetime. And so we're considering issues in advance. So maybe I'll just, you know, contrast that with very often the advice that you're getting from a CPA is really about what's happening this year, right? It's about, it may even be transaction related. Hey, I'm going to be selling my house. What should I do? Or I'm going to sell my business. What should I do? And you get transactional advice. Maybe that's tax planning from a CPA's perspective. But what we're able to do, since we know your income expectations over the next 30 plus years, and we know your assets and the potential income that you could generate from those assets, what we're able to do is compare today's tax rate to a future tax rate. And so what we can do is say, oh, well, when would be the best time to pay those taxes? And it can be a really powerful tool. I say over and over that, one of the best tax planning tools, pieces of advice that I can give you is to simply make the best use of the brackets. Okay. And so, so the goal is really to minimize lifetime taxes. Of course, we're not preparing the return. We're really looking to really come alongside your CPA, not replace what your CPA is doing, but maybe broaden the perspective and the conversation to make sure that we include that long-term view. And so I'm going to hand it off to Carol and have her walk through what we're doing.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve, and hello, everyone. It is so good to see you guys face to face. I don't get to do this very often. And Steve and Walter and I often have conversations about you guys where we just love you guys so much. And we just feel really thankful. We have such great clients and we are quite convinced we have the best clients ever, literally. So we have these conversations and it just is a delight to be able to see you guys face to face and serve you. And thank you for those of you who are online as well. So I'm going to dive in actually into my favorite slide in this presentation. And the reason why I like this slide so much is because we literally consider all these tax planning opportunities for each and every one of you every time we do a financial plan. So you're not aware of them because these don't all apply to you. But I'd like to just walk through this list. I'm going to go pretty fast and skip some of these items. But if you have any questions, we will have a Q&A afterwards. So, fasten your seatbelt. I'm going to try and get through these here. The first tax saving strategy is tax efficient investing. And it's not something that you are aware of, but it is already done for you. One of these items is asset location optimization. And before I explain what that is, I'm going to back up a little bit and let you know, just kind of explain some basics. There are 3 types of tax categories of assets that you guys have. Some of you have all 3 of these. One is what we call qualified money. Those are retirement assets that you made contributions to those on a pre-tax basis. Like if you have a 401k, 403b, you made your contributions before taxes, so you got a deduction for that, or you made an IRA contribution and got a deduction for that. And we call that qualified retirement assets. Sometimes also we'll call that traditional IRAs. That money later, when you're retired and you start drawing on it, you pay income tax on that like ordinary income, like wages. So that's one bucket. Another bucket is Roth money. Those assets, you made contributions into Roth accounts after tax. You got no tax deduction for it at the time you made the contribution, but then those assets grow tax-free forever. All the income, investment income earnings and compounding over the life of your plan, all tax-free. Even when you withdraw those funds later, no taxes. And furthermore, if your kids or beneficiaries inherit Roth assets, they never pay taxes on it. They can take their distributions, never paying taxes, unlike qualified money. So qualified money, if your beneficiaries inherit a traditional IRA from you, they do have to pay income tax on that. And with the exception of very rare cases, they have to take that as income over a 10-year period at most. So those are 2 different buckets. The third bucket of assets that you may have is after-tax investments. What that is like you earned your money, you saved it, and you invested it in a brokerage account, like a savings account. So to kind of make this simple, if you opened a savings account at the bank, it earns interest. You are taxed on the interest income in the year that it's earned. And the same is with your brokerage accounts. So with those three types of buckets, and some of you again have all three, what Cedarstone does is finds the optimal location for different types of assets based on the different kind of tax treatment. So if you have an after-tax investment account, and those investment earnings are taxed in the year they're earned, Cedarstone gives preferential treatment to assets that create capital gain income. The reason that we do that is capital gains are always taxed at a lower rate than ordinary income. And so they get favorable treatment in the after-tax account. For assets that have more aggressive growth, we give preferential treatment to locate those in Roth accounts because Roth accounts grow tax-free forever. And with assets that are income producing, like bond funds that produce interest income, those are already taxed at ordinary income tax rates. Those get preferential treatment in the qualified money. So all this happens without you even knowing it, but that is optimal asset location for tax purposes. We also, in some cases, do gain harvesting. I'm not going to dive into that right now, but that can be a great strategy at times for certain individuals. Another great strategy that is done for you without you even knowing about it is tax loss harvesting. And what that means is that in down years, like we had in 2022, the market was down and we sold some positions in your portfolio and repurchased similar positions that have similar returns and similar asset categories, similar characteristics, so that your overall portfolio stayed the same. But the fact that we've sold those positions enabled you guys to claim losses on your tax return while still keeping your portfolio with the same strategy. So that is a great strategy in a down market, and you guys all got to participate in that. The great thing about harvesting losses, as we call it, is you can then offset those losses on your tax return with gains, and you can even take up to $3,000 per year against ordinary taxable income, and then any remaining balance is carried forward. So it's a great strategy in a down market. Love it. And I just have to say, I get really excited about saving tax money as my CPA heart. So I would love to tell you about all of these, but we're just going to highlight some more here, but just a couple more. But there are a number of great strategies if you are inclined toward charitable giving. I'm going to talk about two of those. One is a great strategy, gifting appreciated stock. So let's say you want to donate $20,000 to your favorite charity, and you also have some Apple stock that's valued at $20,000. You could write a check. You could sell your Apple stock, then write a check for $20,000 to your charity. But what happens when you sell your Apple stock is you have capital gains on that, and you have to pay tax on that. Instead, you can actually just donate your Apple stock directly to the charity. You get your $20,000 charitable contribution deduction. The charity gets their $20,000 and there's zero tax involved. You don't pay any tax on the gains on that. So it's a great way if you are charitably inclined and do have appreciated stock. The second item there applies to anyone who is 70 and a half and older. Qualified charitable donations, QCDs. This is also fantastic if you fall in that category and you have a qualified traditional IRA that you are living on. You could, I'm just going to give an example again, you could take a 10,000 draw from your IRA and then write a check to your favorite charity for $10,000. But what happens is when you take that $10,000 out of your IRA, you now are paying income tax on it like you would on your wages. If instead you have the $10,000 sent directly from your IRA to the charity, they get their $10,000, but you have no income tax. So it's like a tax deductible donation in a sense, and you can still claim your standard deduction on your tax return. So it's a great option if you fall into that category. We also will help clients strategize with concentrated giving. I'm not going to go into these. Donor advised funds, some of you have those, and they're a great opportunity if you're charitably inclined.
I have one, concentrated giving, is it, what, can you define that a little more?
Well, yeah, sure. Concentrated giving is if you are in a situation where you do have some cash reserves, and let's say you want to donate $15,000 every year for a few years as part of your charitable giving strategy. You could, and you don't have, let's say you don't have any other itemized deductions really. You're retired, don't have too much to put on an itemized deduction. If you donate $15,000 in a year, that's not enough to get a tax benefit because standard deduction is around $27,000 right now. But let's say you instead donate 43 years worth of giving all in 1 year. You now have 45,000. You've exceeded your standard deduction and you get the benefit of that as an itemized deduction.
And I assume it has to be the US, right?
It has to be to a qualified charitable organization. There's certain organizations that qualify for a tax deduction.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. I could really talk about each and every one of these strategies because they are so exciting and I love saving money, especially tax money for you guys. Charitable trusts is another great strategy for some people. Charitable remainder trusts are kind of the most common one there. You guys are all familiar with income deferral strategies because you've all participated in a 401k or a 403b and IRAs. Those are all income deferral strategies that can be a really important part of tax planning and obviously a huge part of retirement planning. Tax-free investment accounts are Roth IRAs and backdoor Roth IRAs for higher income earners. We have a lot of great planning opportunities around executive compensation packages. And for clients that have those, we have to strategize on timing and different tax saving strategies for that. Retirement distribution strategies, these apply to all of you who are retired. So you're in the distribution phase when you're retired. And if you have all three buckets that I talked about, we will strategize on the most optimal way to distribute that money to you for tax planning purposes, the way, most optimal for taxes. So, and keeping you within your certain brackets and using a combination of those buckets of qualified money versus Roth money versus after-tax savings. And Roth conversions, I'm going to go into a lot more detail of that in a little bit, but those are a great strategy. And many of you have done that as well. We've done quite a few of those in the last couple of years. We'll talk more about that. Inherited IRA, required minimum distribution planning, because I told you, if you inherit an IRA since 2020, you now are required to have all of that distributed to you no later than the end of 10 years. So there's planning on timing with that and optimizing that for tax purposes. So that is a not quite comprehensive list and a fast tour of what we do consider for each and every one of you, if there are ways we can save you money. We have about a little over a year ago acquired a really amazing tax planning tool that we use and we love. And it's called Holistiplan, but it enables us to actually scan your tax return. And then the system generates a really helpful tax report that helps us to better help you with tax planning. And what I would like to do is just kind of walk you through some key highlights on the tax report. Some of you will be seeing this in increasing frequency as we go forward. So I want to just highlight some of the things we look at
So
there.
what's the name of the program again?
Oh, Holistiplan. It starts HOLISTIPLAN. Holistiplan. Why is this not shared? I am not sure why this is not sharing. Why I am looking at my PDF, only it's not. Let me see if I just did. I mean,
It's because it's.
awesome. And then I can just go back the same way. Okay, this is, pardon our technology here. This is a tax report generated by a sample couple, a married couple filing jointly. And this is the tax report that I was referring to. And what I'd like to do is just highlight some things we look at for you guys when we get your tax return and scan it and get this report generated. There are some key figures we look at and planning opportunities that we look at based on your tax return. So I want first, we're looking at the marginal tax bracket information there. This section, as you can see on the far left, has all the tax brackets, the federal income tax brackets, 10%. If your taxable income is under 20,000, you pay 10% on that. When your taxable income is between 20 and 80,000, roughly, it's 12%. When it goes into, over 80,000, goes into the 22% tax bracket and so on. So we pay a lot of attention to these tax brackets because that's where a lot of planning can happen, where we want to, if we know, now this client, this not a client, this is an example, this example couple, their taxable income is $158,000 and they are in the 22% tax bracket, but I can see here that they have about $20,000 more income they could have and still be in the 22% bracket. So if I know they're going to have higher income in future years, there may be some strategies we can do to accelerate income so that it's taxed at 22%. So that's just an example of some things we do once we see kind of where an individual or a couple is at in their tax brackets. If you look just a little further down, where I'm highlighting, this is the capital gains tax brackets. So remember I said, capital gains is always a better tax rate than the ordinary. So you take a person who has under $80,000, or say 80,000, right at 80,000, they would be in the 12% ordinary income tax bracket. But in capital gains, they're in the 0% tax bracket. They literally would pay no tax on capital gains if they incurred that and they were in that bracket. So
We get really excited about that.
we do, yeah. I know it's not showing, but I'm really excited. So one strategy we love and have done for some is where, especially what in the retirement phase, we have more opportunities, I think, to adjust income in that phase of life. But when we've had clients who have after-tax money, large savings account, or maybe an inheritance, we can have them live on their after-tax money that's not taxable income. It drops them into a lower tax bracket. Then we can sell gain positions, harvesting the gains, letting them take the gains and paying zero tax on it. So super exciting. So we love that. It's a great opportunity. I could talk about this for a long time. So I will try not to get overboard with you guys, but yeah, it's really, really fun. And for most people who are in the 22%, 24%, and even 32% tax bracket, their capital gains rate still is 15%. So that is like considerably lower. So that's where that asset location preference that we do comes in really handy. You know, another section that can be a real snag when it comes to trying some tax planning strategies is for those of you that are 65 and older that are on Medicare. You pay Medicare premiums. If your modified adjusted income exceeds these limits, your Medicare premiums increase. So if we are trying to do some tax planning strategies that accelerate income, like a Roth conversion, for example, which we'll talk more about, we're really always checking this to make sure it does not bump you guys into a higher Medicare premium, because that does make a difference. You know, for this example, this couple has modified adjusted gross income of $225,000. They are already paying a little extra for their Medicare premiums, but if they went into the next tier, it would be $100 a month per person more for an entire year. So we're definitely watching that pretty closely when we do these strategies. The other section, I'm gonna kind of highlight a couple of things over here on the right here where my cursor is. Some of you may or may not know about net investment income tax. This is just such a nasty little tax. What happens is if you have modified adjusted gross income over a certain threshold, $250,000 for a married couple, and you have investment income that's taxable, you actually pay an extra 3.8% tax above and beyond all the other tax. So we look closely at this. In this case, for this couple, they are under, if you kind of see where my cursor is, they are under the threshold, not by a lot. So we keep our eye on that because we would not want to do any kind of tax strategizing that would create or push them into the net investment income tax category. The other thing we're looking at here, you can see with this couple, where my cursor is, the Roth IRA contribution, they're in a phase out for that. So they're not going to be able to make a regular full deduction for a Roth IRA account. In their case, we would consider what's called a backdoor Roth strategy if they're eligible, but we watch that too. And I'm going to skip some information here and take you down to this section on capital gains that I've just highlighted. We always check to see if there's any kind of short-term or long-term capital loss carryover. So if you have a capital loss carryover, which some of you may have this year, because last year we did do the tax loss harvesting that we talked about, created some capital losses. That's an opportunity perhaps to take some gains that can be offset with the capital loss carry forward. So we're checking that too for some opportunities. And lastly, this couple has some business income. So there are many business planning opportunities that we could take advantage of related to businesses. Let me take you down. The tax report, which we're going through, also has a section of observations that are generated automatically. So if we have not already observed some interesting things going through all those numbers that we can do for you guys, there's some great highlights here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just as a couple examples, on the first row, we already talked about this, but the report is highlighting it. if you, this couple has income within 10% of the threshold for the 3.8% net investment income tax. So the report is telling us, consider strategies to reduce taxable income and be mindful of realized capital gains. So a great highlight. Another highlight here that I have just highlighted on the third comment. Sometimes, well, all the time, if you don't pay enough of tax throughout your year, you can be subject to underpayment tax penalties. This comment is telling us what the safe harbor is for these individuals, meaning if they either withhold or pay quarterly estimated taxes of $37,778, they are in the safe harbor. They will not have any underpayment tax penalties. Another, I'll just kind of highlight, this is a specific, this is kind of fun. It even gets into, did you take all of the deductions on your tax return that you could have? So the system noticed that on their business income schedule C, they didn't take any car or truck expenses. So it's highlighting that. Do you have a vehicle that you used for business? So some great tips on these observation sheets as well. So that's the tax report that's generated from scanning your tax return. In another month or two, we're even going to be able to get your tax return with your permission directly from the IRS, which will be so much easier. The other thing that we do with this tax software is we do tax projections. So we can run different scenarios for you. If, for example, it's 2023 now, and you're wanting to sell your home, that's going to have some taxable gain. We can plug that in the 2023 scenario projection and see how that affects your whole, tax outcome. We can, if we suggest a Roth conversion for you, we can say, what happens if we do a $50,000 Roth conversion for you in 2023? And we can plug that in these tax scenarios. And for every scenario we do, we get this exact report. So it's a great tool that we really feel like helps us to help you guys better with our tax planning. And with a back, with that being said, so sometimes we need to look at your tax picture long-term for like 30 years of tax projections. And like Steve was saying, I think what I love about what I'm about to share with you is that because we know your asset balance, because we know your income needs for, the rest of your lives that we planned as financial goals for you. And because we know your income streams, Social Security or pensions, whatever income expectations you have in retirement, we are in a really unique position to do these like 30 years worth of tax projections that your tax accountant doesn't have all that information. So this is again where we can come alongside your CPA and provide some information and also do some really helpful long-term planning for you guys. When we are looking at long-term planning, the question that we're asking is just right here. Is your current tax rate higher or lower than your future tax rate? And depending on that answer, we may have some planning opportunities. If your tax rate in future years is higher, you may be a good candidate for a Roth conversion. So now I'm going to switch gears and kind of show you what we do when we think, okay, you might be a good candidate for Roth conversion. Let's do this 30 years of planning. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. This is an example of an actual couple that we've done. This is the graph that is produced with our financial planning software that shows us a 30-year tax projection. But I want to explain before I talk to you about any kind of special observations, kind of show you how this graph works. Oh, okay, is it not? Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. All right. Before you go bug-eyed with this chart, the way it works. I look at this chart every day, and so I'm so used to it. I don't want to go too fast here because it can look confusing, I think. The chart, the way this works is that if you start at the bottom line, far left, you can see the bottom is years. So the far, you can't see my cursor, but the far left bar is 2023, 2024, all the way to 2053, 30 years for this. This is a married couple. The vertical bars for each year shown represent taxable income for this couple. The different colors in those vertical bars are different types of taxable income for this couple, which I'll go over in a moment. And then the horizontal sloping upward lines, there's a blue line, green line, purple line. Those are tax bracket levels. So the blue line is the lowest one. Any income or vertical bar that exceeds the blue line is now income that's taxed at the 12% bracket. Any income that exceeds the green line is taxed at the 22% bracket, and any income that exceeds the purple line is taxed at the 24% bracket. So that's what those are. And then you may wonder why this, as you move along to the right, there's this big drop suddenly at about year 2050. You can especially see it with the purple line, but all the lines are actually taking a big dip right there. What that is that this is a married couple. This is their plan based on their life expectancy. And based on life expectancy in this situation, that is the end of the plan for the husband. End of plan is a nice way of saying, yeah, you know what I'm saying. Okay, we just, it can be a little sensitive topic. So we say it's the end of the plan. Then when his plan ends, there's a single taxpayer left. The surviving spouse is a single taxpayer. Those tax rates are cut in half. So now, even though the income only reduces a little bit after the husband passes away, the wife has a little bit less income, but brackets are cut in half. So now she's getting,
She's getting killed.
yeah, she's getting killed with her taxes. She's even bumping into the 24%. So we're at the beginning of the plan, they're in their 12%. So you can see how this can end up very dramatically different over time. And I'm going to also just highlight these colors that could look a little confusing as well. If you look to the far left in 2023, that medium blue, in their case, that's some pension income. And the reason why they don't have more income than that little bit, it's about $30,000, is that they are using after-tax money to live on in those beginning years. So they don't have taxable income. Yes, they are living, they're still paying all their bills, but they're using after-tax money, which has no taxable income to it. When you look a little to the right and you see the red part of those vertical bars, that is withdrawals they are taking from qualified traditional IRA money. It's taxed at ordinary income rates, just like your wages. And then you see a few years in, actually 2026, if you can see that, there's a little light blue now. That is Social Security income for them. So in those years, they have IRA withdrawals, they have Social Security income, and they have pension income. And that makes up their taxable income. And lastly, when you see the green, it's still IRA withdrawals that they are taking for their living costs. But those are required minimum distributions. That happens at age 72. And the IRS forces you to take these distributions out of your qualified account whether you want it or not. They'd say, you're gonna take the distribution and you're gonna pay tax on it. That's what we call, that's what is called required minimum distributions, RMDs. Some of you are familiar with that. So now that you hopefully understand how this chart works, some key observation here is that for this couple, you can see where in the later years, even before the end of his plan, their income is getting bumped up into the 22% tax bracket. And that is because RMDs increase the closer you get to end of life. So this is a really common scenario, is that as a person gets near to the end of life, their RMDs are so large, it's bumping them into these higher tax brackets. And obviously you guys have noticed too, that the wife is very heavily into higher tax brackets as a single taxpayer. So this is what it's the same couple. The only difference between what I just showed you and this chart right now is now we've added this bright yellow income. This income is an actual Roth conversion. So let me back up, because I'm not sure I explained this really well, but a Roth conversion is just taking money out of the qualified traditional account. So let's say we take 50,000 out of that. That 50,000 then becomes taxable income to the individual or couple in the year that this is done. That 50,000 goes into a Roth account. So you're essentially prepaying your taxes. But what happens is once you put it in the Roth, now your qualified money is slightly reduced, your Roth is increased. That money grows forever tax-free, as we talked about. So all the income earned on it, all the compounding, all tax-free to you, to your heirs. So what has happened here is by adding the Roth conversion, the bright yellow income, prepaying the taxes, converting it to a Roth, in the end of the plan for the husband in this case still is now below the 22% tax bracket. So it has eliminated that bump into higher tax brackets for him. Wife still is kind of getting killed on taxes, but not as killed. She's not getting bumped into the 24%, she's still in the 22%. And in this example, we did 10 years of conversion. We optimize what gives us the maximum tax savings. Let me get to that. These are the dollar results. So for this couple, doing those Roth conversions actually saved them about $30,000 in tax savings over the life of their plan. This is current dollars. So 32,000 in current dollars over the life of their plan is pretty substantial to pay that much less tax. And honestly, it depends on the person. I have seen this get into the hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax savings, depending on circumstances. But another thing I'll point out is if you see the column in the middle that says with strategy, and then the one next to it is without strategy, these balances are end of plan balances. So these are what their heirs will get. But you can see by doing this strategy that there's actually $65,000 more end of life than if they did not do Roth conversions. That's because of the tax savings and the growth on the tax savings. So it's pretty significant, and we have loved this. This is a great strategy for some of you. Yeah, I'm gonna hand this over to Steve. But he's going to have a few little wrap-up comments, and we have some Q&A. So.
Yeah, well, so maybe I'll just ask you to stay up here, and I'll just say, so one of the reasons why Carol and I, we've talked about, topics for this seminar, and this is something that we're doing, we do a lot, right? The list that Carol put up there is really a list that we came up with in about 5 minutes of just stuff that we're looking at for you all every day.
And so we just wanted to let you know that we're doing this. And also, we're asking for tax returns from you. That's actually something that we hadn't done until a couple of years ago. And so we're asking for that information. I know it's more work for you all, but I think there is a real benefit. It really helps us. And we're hopeful that for each of you that we're able to bring to you some real significant tax savings ideas for you all. So in the interest of time, I'm just gonna open it up to Q&A. So any questions for me or for Carol? Yes, Sam.
I'm thankful you do this, and I've seen some of the benefits already. The relationship you have to the CPA seems to be one where there has to be fairly high trust. Is there anything that, and so that's one question. One question is how do we make sure that that's going well, or what's the best way for us to create that link? Anything we can do to improve it?
Yeah.
Second question would be related to it, and that's my last question. But is the looking at the tax prep for 2022 something you look at, or do you look at it after it's submitted?
Yeah, that's good. How about if I take the first one, you can take the second one. So with regard to just interfacing with your CPAs, I will admit, yeah, we would love your help in that. Sometimes CPAs can feel a little bit threatened, but hey, why is some other person looking at your taxes? It's not our goal to take any business away from him. We're not trying to make him look bad. So that's not our goal. We're really, like I say, we're seeking to complement the work that the CPA has already done.
Why do we have to ask CPA to share the taxes? We can share directly with you guys, right?
Correct. Yeah. So you guys, most of the time we're getting it directly from you. Sometimes we're getting it directly from the CPA. Yeah.
You can prepare that up, that I
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah. Sometimes we're working very closely with CPAs. Sometimes it's a little bit arm's length, but Sam, you raise a great point where if you all can just support this and support, kind of explain to your CPA, that is actually very helpful to support us in explaining why we're confident. You want to take?
Thank you.
Yeah, Sam, you were asking, I guess, for the sake of our online attendees, that when do we want your tax return and when do we actually use it? When is it helpful? We ideally, if you guys have filed your tax return by the April 15th deadline, we love to get it right when it's completed. And then we can put it into our tax software and have that available when we do your plan updates to give you suggestions to do these tax planning strategies. So ideally, that's a great time. We would be getting your completed 2022 tax return right around now. And we would use that for planning opportunities for 2023 and scenarios for 2023 and beyond. Yeah.
Thank you.
And so, Carol, how much time do you spend taking the deadline? My tax return to get sent in was like 64 pages. Right?
Yeah.
And how much time do you take to get that data entered and do some kind of analysis stuff on it? Is that a 2-man hour, a 2-day job, or a 3-day job, or a week?
Depends, I guess.
Some that are more complicated, I can spend a day easy, doing analyses for that and strategizing and doing these 30-year projections. We do have the awesome software, so that's all scanned into that. So that part's very easy. It's more doing the analyses, looking for the opportunities. Does this make sense?
So would you rather a hard copy, or do you want a TurboTax file?
A PDF for sure, but in about a month, maybe 2 months, our software system is going to enable us to actually retrieve it directly from the IRS, and that will be the most ideal.
They got that. And you entered in that program called Holiscan.
Holistic plan. It is one word, but
Holistic plan, one word.
yeah.
So what, maybe I'll highlight the things that we don't do. Yeah. So, we're not looking to make sure that you take all of the deductions for your rental property, right? We're not, double checking your CPA to make sure that you're using the optimal depreciation method, right? We're not, making sure that you're saving all your receipts and getting every deduction that's available on your business for the most part. I think Carol, highlighted one, are you using a car, right? I mean, we're not seeking to replace those kinds of more compliance related tax activities. So it's not like we're double checking the CPA. Like say, I'll say the primary thing that we're doing is taking that long-term view. And so,
Yeah.
I
Good
don't-
clarification.
So I get what you're saying, right? You're not looking to, but will that software in the observation side pull some of that out? So if for some reason we've missed something, appreciation or something, is it programmed to pull that out and provide it enough information that would give us an opportunity to go back to our accountant and go, hey, we missed something here, right? Is that part of the Is that part of the
Yeah, yeah.
programming the software will do?
Yeah. Not at that detail level like depreciation. Okay.
Yeah.
Or did you take every kind of expense you should have taken?
Right.
But it will allow us to highlight some planning. Okay, so I will just speak for myself. I actually do use a CPA to prepare our taxes. And I am a CPA, but I don't do tax prep. So I have observed that my CPA, and I've used two different ones now, does not always think ahead for me. In fact, not at all, neither of them. And they were both very good CPAs. I'm not dissing them, but what I like me here using this on the inside, like it gives an opportunity to think ahead. Like, will a Roth conversion make sense for you? Should we take some capital gains? No CPA has ever said that to me. I even worked for a CPA. Somebody that's really thinking ahead on optimizing your tax situation. So it does give us that opportunity for a long view and some possibly creative opportunities to save tax money. But definitely not those details like that.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it as a
But
potential tool, right?
It is,
To help evaluate who you're currently using.
yes,
Yeah.
personally, I will say,
Right.
because, I use this on myself. I can then say to my CPA, hey, here's a situation. I think that if I accelerate, I have a rental, I can take bonus depreciation, or I can elect to depreciate it over the, however many years. I can see that on my chart, like, oh, I'm close to a threshold. I better take the bonus depreciation instead of, delaying that. So those are opportunities that you can take back to your CPA and say, hey, I think if we have too much income, we're not going to be able to do Roth IRAs. Is there anything we can do to, reduce our tax bill? Those kind of things. That makes sense?
The other thing I would add is that one of the significant shifts for those of you that are retired, you probably have felt this or seen this. When you're working and maybe you're a W-2 employee, maybe even a business owner, a lot of your income is just driven by that. You're a W-2 employee, you're going to get that W-2, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it, right? Maybe there's some deductions, charitable contributions, but for the most part, your income is a fixed amount. But once you retire, Carol and I get really excited when people. I mean, you think I'm joking? Carol is kind of sick. Just
Yeah.
so you know.
But
She's good to have on your team. But
it's a disease.
we really get excited about this, right? Because when you retire, all of a sudden, there's this whole world that opens up where you're in control of your income and which bucket you pull from and how you order the gains that you realize you've built up all of these assets in different buckets all of these years. And the distribution strategy of how you realize the tax on all of those assets is is a huge opportunity, right? That's actually where this becomes much really more powerful is really once you've retired, that becomes where a lot of this really makes a huge difference. But yeah,
So your designation is CFP and yours is CPA.
correct.
Is it uncommon for you guys to work together? Because it seems like there's a real synergy and it makes a lot of sense, but most CFPs don't have a CPA working with them, right?
Yeah, I guess I'll say that's true. I think that CFPs more and more are getting into this. This is a significant trend just because there's so many there's too much opportunity here to ignore. So more CFPs are doing it. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, very good.
That's a great question.
Well, thank
you
Yeah. Thank you. Carol.
so much.
All right. Well, we're running a little bit behind, but not too bad. So I'm going to say we'll take can we just take a 5-minute break? Is that all right? Take a 5-minute break. There's actually a charcuterie tray over back in the corner. So feel free to get more food. And we will begin again at 11:15 with our final session.
Okay.
It's my email. We subscribe. It's really. Purchasing it.
Well.
No.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. We'll get me the PDF out of the comfort of the but you have the menu. Yes.
Just a quick question. So you remember first talked about reduction opportunities and you get a little more. That's something you
And you would have gotten other tried, but if you haven't got because the only one so qualifying. Okay, so then it's
So before we get.
well, no, so you're filling those. And that's.
Oh, got you. Okay.
So it'll be hard. Oh, yes, that's right. Obviously, we'll talk about it. Maybe that's.
Yeah, right? No, we need. So. Very. I call them, so I work with.
It's very. Yeah.
Maybe I'll try and call you back again. I mean, she- You know, she was very busy, like all the people, you know, so. Yeah, it's, every year. Yes. Where else? I don't know. It's like, it's just, like, you know, once it's.
Yeah, he's a very nice guy, very nice. All right, let me see if I can get this.
All right, everyone. So we'll get, maybe if we can gather back up, we'll get started with our final session.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started here for our final session. You know, I always feel like I have the hardest job, right? You know, Carol, you know, just has to talk about taxes that, you know, are pretty, I guess, fixed and predictable. I'm a little bit jealous about that. So, you know, whenever I give this presentation, one of the things I try and do is not just have it be a set of random facts, right? You know, I want it to be, you know, have some theme or message. And so I was pondering, okay, what's the theme for this year? You know, and so I thought, okay, maybe it's a year of living dangerous. Maybe, I don't know, that kind of works, right? And then I thought, well, you know, maybe it's the news of my death has been greatly exaggerated, you know, kind of a Mark Twain quote, you know, the economy. But I don't know, I'm not sure, you know, the economy still is a little bit, you know, on life support, right? So I'm not sure if I wanted to go that far and being that positive. And so, I landed on this as the theme, which is staying on the path. All right. And I think as I think about how I would characterize the economy and the market right now, I think we're in a really high risk environment, and the dominant theme right now is the Federal Reserve raising rates in order to slow the economy. Okay, so that really overshadows so many other factors that really has to continue to be our focus. And so, you know, just to recap, you know, the goal of the Federal Reserve is to stay on the path of reducing inflation without causing recession, right? That's their goal. Inflation is the problem, and the Federal Reserve's job is to fight inflation, right? Stable prices is one of their mandates. And the primary tool that they have to control the economy is interest rates. So that's their tool, and what they're doing is they're using interest rates in order to slow the economy to get inflation under control. All right, and so you can think of it as there's a path. So there's a path where, you know, kind of the ideal case, they raise interest rates, inflation comes down, the economy doesn't tip into a recession, and we stay on that path. That's the sweet spot that the Federal Reserve is shooting for. And, you know, honestly, I don't hear very many pundits saying, yeah, that's going to happen, right? Right? Usually you hear of, you know, one or two other, you know, scenarios, right? So I'll say there's a ditch on both sides of the path. And the ditch on the left side of the path is that the Federal Reserve raises rates too much. And so really, okay, so if interest rates are the tool that the Federal Reserve has, and they raise interest rates too much, then what are the implications? Well, the implication is that a credit crunch begins, okay? So just to recap, you know, the way that this works, or the reason that the interest rates are the tool of choice of the Federal Reserve for controlling the economy and controlling inflation, is that depending on the interest rate, the Federal Reserve can encourage or discourage consumption and investment, right? So the higher the interest rate, the more costly goods and consumption can be. So for example, you know, we all see this in housing, right? You know, higher the mortgage rates go, that puts downward pressure on housing. And so, that's a very common, everyone sees that, but that actual function happens in all kinds of goods, right? Whether it's aircraft or, apartment buildings or buying a new car, right? The level of interest rate has a significant impact on those kinds of decisions. And so if the Federal Reserve raises rates too high, well, all of a sudden people can't borrow, maybe companies can't refinance, and all of a sudden we can end up in a credit crunch. Unemployment rises, consumers struggle, companies contract, and a major recession occurs, right? And that's what everyone is kind of afraid of. As you read the papers, there is a risk. I mean, this is a high risk environment. The Federal Reserve is intentionally trying to slow the economy, and the risk of policy error is high. And so there's a ditch on one side. There's also a ditch on the other side. People don't talk about this one as much, but there's a chance that the Federal Reserve really doesn't raise rates enough. And they talk a good talk, but maybe they don't go as hard. And then inflation continues. It continues to rage out of control. It becomes embedded, and that means that just the expectation, the psychology around inflation can be significant. So that people expect a 10% pay raise because that's what inflation is, right? Or people just expect to pay more, and so that embedded in inflation slows real growth. It can be a real killer on the economy, and that's the ditch on the other side. And so, the theme that I would give you is that so far, the Federal Reserve is doing a pretty good job, but let me complicate this for you. When we think about the Federal Reserve trying to stay on the path, the way that I picture it, using this metaphor, the Federal Reserve is driving the car, they're looking in the rearview mirror, trying to stay on the road. Does that make sense? You guys kind of get it? They can't see the future with perfection. So if there's a major curve in the economy, they're not necessarily going to see that. Now, maybe that's a little bit dramatic, but it's kind of true, right? The Federal Reserve sees what has been happening in the economy, and they're making decisions trying to stay on that path by what's been happening in the past that are going to impact the future. And so they're looking in the rearview mirror. So that's why it's a high risk environment. But I'll say my summary would be, so far, they're actually doing pretty good. They're on course, they're on the path. And probably don't hear that often, but I would argue that the Federal Reserve so far has brought down inflation without causing a recession, and they're doing pretty good. So let's kind of go through the details on that.
Would you say they were late getting going though?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the reason we got to 9.3 was because they started too late. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so with that as our theme, let's just take a look at where we were last year. So last year, it seems like yesterday, right? When we were at Four Seasons last year, many of you were there. We said there were three major themes. First, the bond sell-off has made 2022 more challenging for the conservative investor, but the worst may be over, right? That was one of the things one of the themes. The second theme from last year was stocks are falling on the risk of recession, but if it doesn't happen, there's some upside in stocks. And third, inflation is the most critical factor to watch, and there are signs it may be peaking. Well, so how do we do? So our conference last year was May 20th of 2022, and this is kind of this blue line here on this chart shows where we were on the bond aggregate. And you can see, we are a little bit down from where we were May 20th of 2022, but the worst has been over for bonds, and the bond market has certainly stabilized after a rocky 2022. Yeah,
Sorry.
okay. Let me see if I can fix that. All right, so on the S&P 500, the S&P 500 from where we were May 20th of 2022 is actually slightly up. So we were right around 39.23 on May 20th, right before last year's conference, and I think we closed at 41.53 yesterday. Okay. So slightly up. It's certainly been a rocky year. But basically, the stock market has been just slightly up over that time period. And then, last year, this was the chart that we were looking at for inflation, right? It was quite remarkable, just the spike that we saw in inflation, and we're gonna talk about that, I think, first off. So I'm gonna just kind of give you the themes then for 2023. So what does staying on the path for 2023 look like? So, I'm going to say inflation is still too high, but it is dropping. And I don't know if you guys are feeling that, but prices are still going up, but the rate of increase is dropping. We'll take a look at that. Interest rates are likely to fall as inflation falls, and the bond market is reflecting that. We'll walk through that. And then thirdly, recession is widely predicted, but the economy is still strong. And again, you all may not be feeling that, but the numbers still show that the widely predicted recession is still on the horizon, but never quite arrived. So we'll take a look at that. All right, so let's hit that first one. Inflation is too high, but it is dropping. Okay, so what does it look like? So, like I said, it was about 8.3 when we met last time. It did peak at 9.1 in June of 2022, and CPI, this is CPI, was 5% in March. So that's the latest number. So some good news on the inflation front, still too high, but it is dropping, and what the Federal Reserve is doing is having an impact. The PCED, which is another measure of inflation, fell sharply in March. So you can see that blue line really fell sharply in March. That's one of the reasons why the market has been positive of late. They're seeing that inflation is coming down, and forecasts for inflation are also coming down. So this is the UBS forecast. You can see UBS is basically saying that the Fed will hit its 2% inflation target by the end of 2023. That line is not zero. That can be confusing on this chart. The line is 2%, which the Federal Reserve is saying is their target. And you can see that UBS, at any rate, is forecasting that the Fed will get there by the end of this year. That would be a great thing. A couple other just positives on the inflation front. This is brand new. PPI, so this is the Producers Price Index, and this is an index, not what the consumers pay, but what the producers pay, right? And many see this as a precursor, right? What the producers are paying often flows through a couple months later to what the consumers are paying. And so Producers Price Index fell sharply in March, down to 2.7 in March. Great news on that front. So, all signs are that inflation really is coming down quickly. One thing that I will point out, just kind of an interesting nuance, is that the goods inflation. So when we break inflation into the pieces of goods versus services, goods inflation is collapsing. So 1.6% in March, versus services. So things like hotels, travel, medical services, all fall into that category. Services are actually continuing to rise. And so that is kind of an interesting, we're seeing kind of this rotation of where the inflation is coming from. But nonetheless, all good signs that inflation is coming down. Okay, then the second theme would be that interest rates are likely to continue to fall as inflation falls. So, so this is the Fed funds rate, right? We've all felt this. This is, you can see that march upward from almost zero to the current range is 4.75 to 5 is the Fed's funds rate. Again, this is what the Fed uses to help influence interest rate. The Federal Reserve doesn't set the rates that you and I pay, but you can think of this as the cost that the banks pay, right? The cost of money that the Federal Reserve sets. And so it's at 4.75 to 5. The next meeting is on May 2nd. And it's likely, most economists believe that the Federal Reserve will make one more step up to 5.25. 5 to 5.25 will be the range. And we'll see. They may announce a pause at that point. And let me kind of just show you why people are thinking that. So this is something called the dot plot. I find it interesting. I hope you guys do too. It's called the dot plot. It's called the dot plot because every one of these dots represent a voting member of the Federal Reserve Board. Okay. And so basically what they do is they publish each voting member of the Federal Reserve Board, but basically publishes their expectation of where they think interest rates will be, the Fed funds rate will be. It's kind of helpful, right? You know, we don't know how they'll ultimately vote, but you know, each one is a voting member, so we can kind of see. And so you can see, I guess, first of all, if we look at 2023, the Federal Reserve, the voting members, you can see that concentration there in 2023. There's most of the dots are right around 5.2%, right? That's why everyone's saying, well, we'll probably pause at 5.25. This next May 2nd meeting will probably end up with a 5.25% Fed funds rate. But that you can see as we go down through 2024, 2025, and then longer term, you know, we could argue about the individual ranges, but notice the slope of that curve. It is dramatically down, right? And so it is pretty hard to argue that the members of the Federal Reserve believe that the Fed funds rate and interest rate and inflation will come down dramatically over the next 2 years, right? And so I think that that's a key theme. And so, you know, I guess the other thing I'll point out on this chart. So the purple line there is where the market. So if you look at the options market, where does the market think interest rates will be? And that's the purple line. So the market is in believing the Federal Reserve, but I'll say, you know, even if we quibble about the levels, same direction, same general trajectory of dramatically down over the next 2 years for interest rates. Okay. And this is the yield curve. So this is the US Treasury yield curve. Again, same direction, right? Interest rates are coming down. That's great news, right? Because as we look, you know, as we think about where the economy is and where bond and stock markets are going, if interest rates peak and start to come down, that can be very positive for both stocks and bonds. All right. And then lastly, this is probably going to be the most controversial. As recession is widely predicted, but the economy is still strong. So let's just kind of go through this. So, you know, right now, and I'll say, if we actually look at the numbers, you know, the economy is really slowed to a crawl, arguably, we are not yet in a recession. And so this is the quarterly GDP numbers. These are annualized, but for comparison's sake, but this is the quarterly GDP. You can see that Q1 of 2023 was at 1.6%. Actually not too bad, right? And we got to our lowest point of Q4 of 2022 of 0.9% growth in GDP. Almost there, almost a recession, but not quite. And so when I say the Federal Reserve is on the path, this is exactly what we want to see. The Federal Reserve is seeking to slow down the economy without dropping it into recession and have inflation come down. So far, they're on the path. Looking forward, here's 2023, the second quarter for 2023. Blue chip consensus, which is there on the, well, let me kind of explain what this is. This is the Atlanta Fed's GDP now. It's kind of an interesting statistic. You guys can look it up on your own if you're interested. So the Federal Reserve Bank in Atlanta produces a report that they update weekly that they call GDP Now. So usually GDP comes out weeks after the end of the quarter. It's based on all this information that isn't constructed until after the fact, and so it's not all that helpful, right? And so what the Federal Reserve Board of Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta did is they said, well, what if we just collect that data real time throughout the quarter, and we'll just post it, and it's our GDP now. If we had to guess what GDP would end up being, this is what it would be, right? And so it can be an interesting forecast of where GDP will end up. And so you can see that the blue chip consensus, so this is a survey of economists, show that they're expecting Q2 of 2023 to be flat, basically zero growth. But so far, GDP Now, the Atlanta Fed is saying, growth again of around 1.9%. So what's going on? Why are things so good, frankly? And I'll say, one of the things is that jobs are plentiful. And I don't know if you guys are seeing that or feeling that, but here's a survey that is put out by the Conference Board of whether or not people are saying jobs are plentiful or jobs are hard to get. And you can see as of April, actually, one of the stronger figures on this chart as of April, still most people are saying jobs are plentiful. Almost no one, or very low levels are saying that jobs are hard to get. Even if we look back into maybe those good years of 2015, 2014, higher levels of job availability even from those years.
So what's the horizontal axis? Those numbers today?
This is the percent, so it's a survey. So the percent of respondents that are saying that jobs are plentiful.
That's the height, but what about the horizontal axis?
The horizontal is years. Sorry, is that not legible? So it goes back to 1966.
Okay.
Yeah, years. So it's years, and so so it does go back quite a ways, which is why we can compare that over time. So where we are today is actually, the job market is actually really strong. Consumer spending is strong. So one of the things that 80% of the U.S. economy is consumer spending. And so one of the things that is a great indicator of where the economy is going and is the strength of the U.S. consumer. And you can see, in Q1, you can see consumer spending over the last 12 months on goods kind of flatlined, right? And so that's been maybe in the news of, people are spending less on appliances and cars and some of the things that they loaded up on during the financial crisis, or excuse me, during the COVID crisis. But they're rotating those dollars into services, and you can see that spending on services is actually hitting new highs. And the reason is that disposable personal income is still very strong. Again, this is over the long term. If we look at disposable personal income, how much does the US consumer have to just spend on whatever they want to spend? It did take a dip in 2022. You can see that drop mostly because of inflation, right? So this is real. So that red line dropped just because of inflation, but has recovered and is now, at or higher than the levels that disposable personal income was at before the COVID crisis. Again, real average hourly earnings. This is this covers about 80% of US workers. So about 80% of US workers are seeing a real increase in their wages. So wages are going up, jobs are plentiful. I mean, this doesn't look like a recession so far, right? And other forms of personal income are also at record highs. So when we break it out into interest income, dividend income, rental property income, and proprietors income for small businesses, all look like they're going in the right direction. So, all right, so that's kind of where we are right now. And I think, I always dream of coming to this conference and have there not being a crisis, right? And, the market had a great week. Maybe this is as good as it's going to get, right? So, despite all the negativity out there, despite maybe, some of what you're seeing in the pundits, so far, like I say, it is a high risk environment, but the economic data I would summarize to say that the Federal Reserve is on the path of pushing inflation down without causing recession at this point. Okay. All right. So what could go wrong? Right. And I thought I'd maybe hit a few of these before I get asked the question. So let me kind of, hit a couple of those high risk points. So, I mean, probably the biggest thing that could go wrong is that inflation persists, right? I mean, we talked about the inflation forecast. There's all kinds of great data that says that inflation is going to come down, but it's not a foregone conclusion. So if inflation comes in higher than expected, that would be bad for the market, bad for the economy. The Federal Reserve would have to raise rates more. That's probably the biggest risk. Again, that's the primary theme. But there's probably other things that are on your mind. And I wanted to address a couple of those. The first one is the banking crisis. And so let me go ahead and just see if I can summarize the banking crisis. So I wrote an article on this. I'm not sure how many of you saw it, but the banking crisis, this banking crisis is very, very different from 2008. And I find it fascinating because this banking crisis is not because the banks made some kind of bad investment. It's not necessarily because, the banks are, have bad loans. That's where we always think of bank crises. We think of bank crises as they made bad loans and loans are defaulting. And so now the banks are going under. And it's a completely different, it's a completely different problem. It's on the other side of the balance sheet. Banks are just not all that competitive anymore. And so what has happened is that, rising interest rates has caused unrealized losses on the bank's balance sheet. So that is on the investment side. But what has happened is that US Treasuries have, as we just saw, US Treasuries are now paying about 5%, which is an amazing interest rate, right? And basically risk-free. It's issued by the full faith and credit of the US government. So if you have, it's especially critical for big depositors. If you're a big depositor with $10 million at Silicon Valley Bank, why would you take 1-2% from Silicon Valley Bank in a savings deposit account if you could take that $10 million and invest in US Treasuries at 5%, right? And that's really the crux of the problem, is that the banks, the Federal Reserve has raised rates so that the banks aren't even competitive anymore. And so it's not a it's not a bad investment by the banks. What's happened is the customers are just leaving the banks and they're pulling their deposits. And so what happened, especially at Silicon Valley Bank, is depositors began to move, their deposits to the better rates. And it became somewhat of a slow motion bank run, right? When that slow motion bank run forced Silicon Valley Bank to go ahead and sell some of their assets at a loss, everybody said, whoa, what's going on? Now we're worried. And what was a slow motion bank run accelerated and became a fast run, and depositors started to pull money. So again, it's just depositors pulling money out of the account. Okay, so the issue is that this isn't just a Silicon Valley Bank or Republic or Credit Suisse. The issue is that really all banks have the same problem, that they're just not competitive with the Federal Reserve and US Treasuries in terms of the interest rates they're paying. And so it's a persistent problem. Well, what has the Federal Reserve done? What the Federal Reserve has done is basically committed to lending money to the banks. And this is particularly helpful to the small regional banks because they tend to be the ones that are most impacted. So what does that look like? So here's, I actually kind of find this chart to be pretty informative. You can see that the top line, that blue line, is all deposits in US banks, right? And it's, $17 trillion, right? So there's a lot of money in the United States banks. $17 trillion. And you can see over the last 12 months, boy, that line just barely dipped down. It's a little bit disconcerting. Just that small little dip is really what caused this crisis. You can see what the banks did in response is they sold securities. So that's the green line. So in order to fund the withdrawal of those deposits, they sold securities, realized the losses on those securities. And that's really what caused the crisis. So the yellow line then is borrowings primarily from the Federal Reserve of those banks. And you can see that big spike up. And that's the Federal Reserve solution. So the Federal Reserve has stepped in. They've become the lender of last resort for this bank term lending program. And basically they've said that they're going to backstop the banks and be willing to lend as much as they need in order to fund the deposits, the withdrawals of these deposits. So that's kind of the banking crisis in a nutshell. I would give you my personal opinion is, for the time being, it appears that the crisis is over, but the concern is the root cause. My concern would be that the root cause is still there, right? That as long as the Fed funds rate, as long as US Treasuries are paying 5%, it's just going to be very, very difficult for these banks to be competitive. And so that may take, another year or two to work out, and we're not necessarily out of the woods yet. Now, remember the chart from the Fed funds rate and the decline in interest rates. If we see the Fed funds rate coming down, if we see interest rates coming down as expected, this should all abate here over the next 12 to 24 months. And I'm just gonna, in the interest of time, kind of. So I will hit this, so just so you know, one of the things that, in some of the economic reports that we receive, we are looking at this. So the banks all publish the number of deposits, and so that they have. And so one of the economic reports that I received basically provides us with a weekly update on the deposits within the small regional banks. And this is a great barometer of whether or not the problem is continuing, right? If we see that these deposits continue to drop, well, then that's an indication that whatever the Federal Reserve did isn't working. People are still pulling money, and that we're going to have an ongoing problem. So far, this is a couple of weeks old to this chart, but so far, as of 4/5, we are seeing, on this chart, you can see weekly change. Look at the drop in March. You can see, what is that? Close to 200 billion pulled out of small regional banks, right? It's a huge drop. But once the Federal Reserve came in, you can see that beginning in April, it did stabilize. What the Federal Reserve did, stabilize the problem, and deposits actually rose slightly in small regional banks. So that's a good sign. So far, so good. And then, one of the things that is a concern of the Federal Reserve and is a concern for most economists is, well, these small regional banks also provide a lot of loans. Matter of fact, a lot of loans to small businesses and real estate developments, particularly in the Midwest. And so, what's going to happen if these banks are afraid to lend? And so the other aspect of this is, okay, are those banks still making loans? And similarly, we see a huge drop. And this is in billions as well. So a huge drop for March, stabilizing in April, a good sign that the banking crisis is over. Okay. And then debt ceiling crisis, I'll say, I don't know what to tell you guys about the debt ceiling crisis. As you know, I hate issues that are political in nature, right? I just, they're so difficult to predict. I will admit it is something that is on my radar. As it currently stands, the U.S. hit the debt ceiling in January. So the U.S. officially can't borrow any more money, and so they're officially, the Treasury is using extraordinary measures to make sure and pay the bills. That is scheduled. We'll see, but that's scheduled to be July, before the Treasury just can't, it's going to have to start defaulting on obligations. So we'll see whether or not the politicians can figure this thing out and come to a resolution. The one consolation would be, we've been here before, and we've always figured it out before. I don't believe that either party wants to be blamed for as being the party that allowed the United States to default on obligations. So it's very likely that they'll play chicken, see who blinks, but at the end of the day, I do believe that we'll get a deal done. Maybe the longer term issue is that the debt levels are an issue. And one of the things that is happening is that these higher interest rates that we're seeing do have an impact on the cost, the net interest paid by the U.S. government. So you and I, taxpayers, are the ones that are paying these higher interest rates, right? And so this is kind of an interesting chart that shows the growth in what the interest is. It's the growth in the interest that the U.S. government pays on its debt, and at different levels. And so you can see, we've, on the average, the U.S. government is paying about 2.3%. And so you can see that has already had a dramatic impact on the cost of that debt to the U.S. taxpayer, rising to about $500 billion a year just as a reference point, total US GDP is about 2 trillion. And that becomes a significant headwind to the economy going forward. So, all right. I'm just about out of time, so I'm gonna go ahead. I'm a little bit over here, but I'll just summarize by saying we really just have a high degree of uncertainty. So how do we position the portfolio? Well, I'll say, in my opinion, we do continue to use bonds for good yield and stability. So bonds really do make sense. I know bonds had a terrible 2022, but in this environment, they actually provide good stability and good yield. We want to anchor on high quality self-funding companies. And so we do use fundamental indexing to find those companies. So things like the PIMCO small cap and PIMCO fundamental index in the portfolios anchor on that. Try and find fundamental index. So fundamental indexing overweights companies that have better fundamentals. And so it's not a stock picking strategy. It's a strategy that looks at sales, dividends, book value, and net income of companies, and then overweights those companies with those better fundamentals. Yeah, great question. Thank you, Sam. Try to find groups of companies that have already priced in a recession. So small cap, we believe, is very cheap right now. Find companies or areas that have advantage in the current environment. So semiconductors, that is something that is a theme. So we talked about the Strive Fund shock. We added to that to the portfolio simply because given the US government's emphasis on onshoring semiconductor production, we believe that that's a very favorable environment that will represents a significant theme over the next 5 years, regardless of which direction the economy goes. And then, identify companies that have a low correlation to the macro environment. And that's one of the things we've discussed Eventide in the portfolios before, but Eventide is good at identifying those companies, particularly in the biotech space, that have good returns, again, regardless of where the economy goes. So that's the positioning. Let me just open it up then for questions.
Well, I guess the question that comes to mind is that the philosophy that we all buy into by being a part of this is a bond strategy. Basically, the base is bonds, and this is though last year was tough. Hard to do much good with bonds last year. This year is looking better.
Yes, bonds. That was how I would have summarized bonds exactly.
And do you expect that? Is there any way to know the trend lines on bonds?
Well,
for that sort of thing.
When you say the trend lines on bonds, I mean the
Stable.
Yeah, so I would say they're stable. So on the bond side, a couple of observations. So first, yields have really come up. So you may recall for really post 2008, post financial crisis, the yields on bonds have been historically low, and the pain of 2022 was really this normalization of rates. And so now all of a sudden the yield on our bond portfolio is over 5%. And so that now becomes very, very attractive. Okay, I can get 5% with that is, I'll say, negatively correlated to a recession. So if a recession occurs, the value of that income stream actually tends to rise instead of fall, right? And so
So the bonds then become this good, as you say, Sam, you know, this kind of this anchor or the stable base on which we build a portfolio. It gives us a good stability, and despite 2022 now becomes this very, very interesting asset. Now, if interest rates were to fall, then that would be even more favorable, right? We could see a recovery of some of the pain of 2022 could actually normalize and come back. But even if that doesn't happen, even if we see a stabilization of rates at this level, we'll take that yield and we'll take the stability.
Okay. Thank you.
Steve, I have a question.
Yeah,
Technology, so I was looking at technology, what's going to happen. Artificial disruption from artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Working happen, ChatGPT coming in like full force, you know, it can really absolute many jobs. You know, I can see
Yeah.
the front office jobs will be gone. You know, ChatGPT knows a lot of things in marketing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I started to add that to the portfolio, Yogi. You know, you may have seen, you know, Microsoft was up 7% in a day this week, right? So
Yeah.
Microsoft is really rallying, and I'll say the tech stocks are rallying because of the, you know, the belief that the mega cap tech companies are going to be the primary beneficiaries of the technology, right? And have the billions to spend on it. But yeah, I am participating in several forums. Actually, I'll be going to a conference at the end of May to discuss that very thing, and not just implementation of it, but kind of the implications for the overall economy. I don't think anybody knows yet, right? It's going to be a big disruptor.
Really, a lot of ChatGPT, what's going to happen? What is going to happen?
Yeah.
How interesting all jobs. Monday is gone.
Yeah.
Very soon.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you, and I will say I don't know yet, and it's I don't know that we can see that future yet. You know, it's artificial intelligence could be a new printing press, you know,
Yeah.
transistor. You can kind of look back on those watershed moments technology wise, and artificial intelligence does appear to be one of those.
You see the
Significant
company
events.
called SS&C, the hedge fund company, right, in New York.
Mhm.
It's not in the Hampshire, you know, and
Yeah.
they've been buying technology platform.
Right.
The whole AI, you know.
Right.
That is one of the worries I have, the disruption that happened overnight. What happened in, I read in 1999, .com,
Yeah.
voice over IP came and.
Right. Right.
It's going out of all the small businesses. So
Yeah.
that's-
Yeah. Great point, Yogi. Yeah. Anyone else? All right. Well,
Thank you.
you guys are unusually quiet. What's up? Well, thank you all. I know as many of you drove from a long distance, and so what we did this year for you all is for our gift to you, we actually bought you lunch. So we have some boxed lunches back on the back table. So, you know, before you drive home, you know, to Orange County or wherever you guys came from, please grab lunch. And there's also some books on the table on the way out the door. We've also brought some books for you guys as our gift to you. And so please feel free to take one on your way out. And thank you again. We appreciate you all.
And fill out the survey.
Oh, yes. And I'm sorry. Yes. So please fill out the survey. I'd love to hear your feedback.
Thank you, Steve, very much.
All right. Thanks, Ian.
Good session. We'll talk